Okay, so I think we should get started. So hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are going to be talking about the data management plans, and we have two speakers. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Grant Gibson. He needs not a lot of introduction. Most of you probably already know him. He's the Assistant Director of Research and Evaluation at CRDCN. And our other speaker, James Doiron, he is the Research Data Management Strategist Director and Academic Director of the University of Alberta Research Data Center, and he sits on a number of committees, and the most relevant one to this webinar is that he's a co-chair of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada's Data Management Planning Expert Group. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to them to start with the webinar. So off to you. I think, Grant, you're starting, right? No. Oh, no, sorry, James, you're starting.
Yeah, I'll dive in first and then pass it to Grant. Thanks very much for the kind introduction. I hope that everybody's doing well and enjoying some good summer weather and some time off to relax and recharge. Just before we jump in, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm delivering today's webinar from Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional homelands for diverse Indigenous people, including the Cree, the Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and just many others whose histories and languages and cultures continue to enrich and influence our communities. I'm going to try to keep my content delivery to under 30 minutes. I even have a clock across from me that's mostly for Grant's knowledge, and then pass it over to Grant so that he can get to talk to you a little bit more specifically about some of the CRDCN specific DMP templates, and hopefully those will make a bit more sense to you there. And then I know we've built in some time for some questions and discussion. So without further ado, if you can just give me a moment, I'll get into screen sharing mode here. Seeing that okay? Perfect. Okay, so I won't be able to see the chat but if folks, if you have questions while I'm presenting, feel free to add those into the chat, or again, we will have some time for questions and discussions as well. So I've been introduced as Perry indicated. I'm the Research Data Management Strategies Director at the U of A Library and the Academic Director of the U of A Research Data Center. So in this content, I look at it both from a service delivery model, but also as an AD for an RDC and how we can look to leverage and support our researchers in the research. And then I co-chair the DMP Expert Group for the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So what is a data management plan? I think that's the first thing we should just touch on. And in essence, it's a formal document which really looks to try to articulate the strategies and the various tools that you will use to implement to effectively manage your data, hopefully effectively. But it speaks to the management of data, not just during the active phases of research, not just while you're out there collecting or processing, analyzing data, but also after the completion of the research projects. And we'll talk a bit more about what that means as we get into the content. But really, it's about trying to address challenges, potentially issues related to research data management prior to the start of a research project. Just as a bird's eye kind of a view, this is the standard types of sections you might see in a data management plan. And then within any given section, you'll see a number of questions, and those can differ depending upon the type of research in terms of methodology or discipline that you're involved in. But we're talking about things around data collection or acquisition, working with the data, documentation and metadata, things around storage and backup, sharing and reuse. Now, many of these things are spoken to or are worked with the same by virtue of working within the RDC. So hopefully that takes some of the lifting and some of the onus of trying to figure out, what it is that you're actually doing around data management in that context. But every project has its own context and deserves to be looked at in that sense. And hopefully the resources and the templates that we're going to talk to you about today and provide information about will be supportive for you in that sense. But why are DMPs important? And they're important for lots of reasons, but kind of very succinctly, they help you to set out those consistent strategies prior to getting out to your research. So my own background by and large is in applied health and social sciences research. I came over into the library maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, but prior to that, the brunt of my career is spent in soft grant funded environments, faculty level, and living and breathing that research cycle. So these are the type of things that have been really important for helping myself and for helping those colleagues I work with on their research projects, trying to identify various strengths and weaknesses in your practices, and then to help integrate them into your processes. And there's certainly things that we know have worked for us in the past, and if that's the case, and we can use them again in the future, and whether they be processes or platforms or so forth, that's great. But certainly from my own experience, I've had lessons learned, and if you can learn those lessons and then find better ways, or bookmark those things so that down the road you can find some better ways to do things, that's another way of supporting your research data management. And really just about getting the data in good shape, not just for yourself and your immediate needs for your own research, but also for down the road, whether that's for yourself or if it's appropriate, and part of the model of your management of your data long term for future reuse and sharing and preservation. And anything that has the word planning in it, hopefully it's helping you to be more efficient, more organized, and that can equate into reducing the cost of research. And that cost I also measure in time, which is what I think is the most important asset, or the most important thing that researchers have, is really their time. And if you can somehow, put in a little bit of work at the front end to help save lots of time in the back end, get a better research outcome, then that's a good thing. Just want to very quickly point you to the Tri-Agency Research Data Management Policy. It was released in March 2021. I will make my slides available, and so there's a link here on this slide and many other links and other slides you can use to get to it in case you're not familiar. It really speaks to three main pillars, which is institutional strategies. So every institution, post-secondary institution in Canada is charged now with developing and releasing an institutional research data management strategy, with that deadline coming up in March 2023. Data management plans, which we'll speak to today, and data deposition. So around data management plans, we're starting to see where specific funding opportunities will require DMPs to be submitted at the time. And there's lots of details within there that we don't have time to get into today. They may come up in maybe some of the questions. I can certainly speak firsthand to them. I'm in direct contact and conversations with the Tri-Agency around these and in supporting their impending requirements. But they have very recently released an initial set of funding calls that will require DMPs. And so I've got a link to that call there, and those can potentially start as early as this coming fall. So when should a DMP ideally be created? As early as possible, as with many things. The earlier you get into it, the better. And so using a grant-funded model, getting in there at the grant funding proposal stage, for instance, which may, as we just saw on the last slide, start to become a requirement. Although, there's lots of unfunded research or many different models and such, and not all projects are equal in terms of size and complexity. But again, just as a general rule, the sooner you can start thinking about it, the better. I just want to note that DMPs are living documents, so it's very rare that someone might, at that earliest of stages, be able to write in a fully, complete and executable DMP. There's some things that you just won't know at that time. And again, because it is a living document, things can change, certainly over longitudinal projects. You can go back and potentially revise them, make changes to them. And the DMP Assistant is that we're going to talk about, is a tool that can help support with a lot of these things. I want to point you to the Digital Research Alliance of Canada's website. Again, there's a link there for you. It's a new organization in the sense that it's a little over a year old, but it's coming from the roots from many other organizations before. And so here we can see that they have three broad kind of areas of focus: advanced research computing, research software, and research data management, which is where I'm primarily involved. If we go into their research data management page, they've got lots of different links there for you to platforms, including the DMP Assistant and our federated research data repository, learning and training modules and resources and such, and then also the network of experts. And when you click on that network of experts, you'll see all the different expert groups across many different areas: metadata and research and management training and curation and so forth. And then the data management planning expert group that I co-chair as well. So if you have interest and you want to look at that website or bookmark it, feel free to do so. The DMP Expert Group works to promote and nurture a strong data culture in Canada to really support institutions and research excellence at those institutions and the researchers themselves. We do a lot of work around developing and making available resources in the form of guidelines and best practices and videos and so forth, as well as guidance materials for that DMP Assistant platform that I'm going to give you some information about shortly. Here's a slide that just gives you a bit of a bird's eye view with some links to some of those resources. The brief guides and primers, we've got some that are very just, dip your toe in the water. Somebody may not have any knowledge about these things. And so, 1 to 2 pagers around what DMPs are, how to create an effective DMP is one that I think is extremely useful. And I'm going to point you to it and show you to it a bit later as well. But it just really walks folks step by step through a standard data management plan, the sections, the kind of things to think about. Also, we have a suite of tutorial videos there from introduction to DMPs into managing DMPs using the DMP Assistant platform. We've released so far, I think it's 9 DMP exemplars. So these would be good examples of DMPs that range across a few disciplines and research methodologies. And we've got more in the hopper being developed now. And so speaking to what we are working on right now, we've got a DMP 101 plus training video that is almost content ready, and then will be formatted and translated because everything that comes out of the DMPEG and all the other expert groups alliance comes out bilingually. So that takes some time and resources to do that. We've also got an updated institutional administrator guide for the DMP Assistant, which is not a small trivial document by any means, but it's really well laid out. Easy to navigate, and it's going to be really important and a good support for the various administrators of the DMP Assistant at institutions. And I'll explain that a little bit later. And as I mentioned, we've got new DMP exemplars in development. So they are trying to fill some gaps in terms of some of the maybe the research methodology or disciplines that we don't have exemplars for yet. And we're looking forward to getting those hopefully coming into early-ish fall. So here at the Alliance homepage, there's also the link to the DMP Assistant platform. Many of you, if you're at your post-secondary institutions, will have links to it embedded as well, likely through your libraries or maybe through your research offices. But at any rate, here's one way you can get to it. The DMP Assistant is hosted by the University of Alberta Library, where I'm located, and it's supported certainly both financially and in terms of collaborative work-wise by the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. It's a national, freely available bilingual data management planning tool to help researchers with the management of their data. And so anyone can create an account for it. You don't have to be at a post-secondary institution or in a particular sector. You don't even have to be in Canada. So it's really very, very open in that sense. And it helps for researchers to develop DMP by prompting them to go through those types of sections, like I showed you in that bird's eye slide, and then go through a lot of key questions pertaining to those sections. And most importantly as well, to provide good best practice guidance and examples. So again, there's a link there on this slide for you. Very briefly, you can go in there and create project plans. You can use either a generic or an institution specific or discipline or methodology specific template. So that's just to say that there's different templates to choose from. And those are evolving as well. So hopefully there's something in there that can work for whatever type of research somebody's involved in. Again, you can see that guidance appropriate to that particular template. And then you can collaborate with researchers on the plan. And again, because it's free to use, and there are a feature in there to be able to open it up and allow permissions. So I can give somebody that I'm working with read-only or editor or co-owner permissions, and I can give those or take them away very easily. And then you can also connect to local guidance support for your own institutions. Hopefully, if you don't already have an administrator institution, you will soon. Certainly with the impending truancy requirements, we expect to see more and more of those coming aboard. But we will also always be happy to try to provide support centrally from the DMP Assistant service team. Institutions can go in and customize the portage templates for their institution. And that is also in terms of the guidance that they provide, which is great because I know from my perspective here at U of A, we've got a number of resources that are specific to our on-campus users. And so I want to make sure that they're aware of them. So if I can go in and customize our templates with that guidance to make them aware, that's a really helpful feature as well. And it's good that we can go in there and get, you know, at least a general sense about the usage of the DMP Assistant at our institution, certainly in terms of how many users we have, as we start to see the usage across various templates. And as we start to see, again, requirements for DMPs, we can anticipate that the need to support DMP development, the DMP Assistant itself at our institution will grow. And so being able to see those metrics and kind of forecast a bit and make the case, hopefully to get support and more resources if needed, can be quite helpful. We also have a national DMP Assistant Steering Committee, and that provides us essential guidance and support for direction of the DMP, including, you know, lots of new features, kind of high level API integration with other systems. Again, we can think about impending requirements where we may want to see the DMP Assistant be able to seamlessly or as seamlessly as possible integrate with grant platforms and institutions or ethics platforms, again, as appropriate and as supported. Reviewing and evaluating DMPs. We're looking at developing a repository for supporting DMPs that will have DMP Assistant integration, again, to make that very easy if somebody wants to deposit their DMP and have them assigned with a digital object identifier, preserved and made accessible. DMP versioning, so if you do go back and make changes, kind of, as I was mentioning, the living document kind of aspect. So if you make some major changes, be able to still be able to version it and have previous and current versions, and just really leveraging the power and potential of the persistent identifiers and the machine actionability aspect. So that's a really important committee for us. We have, along with the host institution and DMPEG folks and the service team, we have tri-agency representation as well as the First Nations Information Governance Center on there, and they're great folks to work with. Really grateful for their time. This is a very bird's eye view look at the features of the DMP Assistant, which we're going to get into here momentarily. So supports cross-institutional research collaboration, as I've mentioned. It's freely available to end users, certainly not free for us to run. And I can speak very directly to that, but it will never have a cost attached to it for the end user. As I mentioned, web-based and bilingual, so very accessible in that sense, and endorsed by the tri-agency within their RDM policy. I mentioned it provides the guidance and examples, which are quite key, and those are evolving and have the ability to be customized by the administrators and institutions. You can have multiple DMPs. I have yet to find the ceiling. I have quite a few myself, whether that be for my own research endeavors that I'm involved in, or ones that have been shared with me where I'm providing guidance, or just testing and teaching ones. So certainly you can try to find the ceiling there, but just like you can be involved in lots of different research, you can have lots of different DMPs in the platform. As I mentioned, there's different permissions in terms of access, co-owner, editor, read-only, and you can export the DMPs into some fairly standard formats, including PDF text and Microsoft Word, and we've mentioned the living document aspect already. So rather than go in and give a live demo, what I've chosen to do is give some screenshots to focus in on really key standard features that I think are these are the ones you really need to know. And then there's also a link at the end here to a more in-depth video that you can go to that was presented by my colleague, Robin Nicholson. And I think that goes down into a little more into the detail as well. And so at the homepage here for the DMP Assistant, you can see that we've loaded up a lot of those resources that I gave to you in the previous slides. So somebody can get to that page and you can very quickly access those tutorial videos or the webinars or the brief guides. I can go in and either create my account, create your own email and password, or if I'm already got my account, I can just go ahead and I can sign in. Now, upon signing in, I can either access an existing DMP that I have, or I can go and create a new one. Either way, once we do that, we're going to see some top-level information about the DMP at that study level. Here, I am showing at the side as well with the actions. So if you have some existing DMPs, off the bat, you can go in and you can click on those, and you can, at that top level, either go in to start editing it, you can share it, you can download it, copy it if you want. And that's actually a nice feature if you're involved in similar types of research, as as many of you would be, or potentially would be, or your clients would be working in the CRDCN. So you can kind of go and clone an existing DMP, if you will, and then use that as the foundation for your next DMP, change content as you need. When you're going to create a new plan, you're going to go in and fill out some basic information. So what's the research project I'm planning? And I can indicate if that's a test or a practice project, but just give it a bit of a title there. I can indicate the research organization I'm affiliated with. Here I would choose University of Alberta. You get the whole list of all the organizations and institutions that are part of it. If yours is not on there, then you can choose other. And if it's something where you want to see your institution on there, I mean, that's something where you can certainly reach out to your research office or library, or touch base with us to see if they've contacted us to get that going or not. Then you can choose the template you'd like to use. And again, that earlier slide where I showed the various sections, those are based on what's called the Portage template. Portage is the former organization, the initial one that launched the DMP Assistant that operated under the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. And so it since has evolved into the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So we've had that Portage template since the get-go. But now we also have a lot of other templates here. As I mentioned, those came out. So we've got, I think, 13 of them now coming across various research disciplines and methodologies. So you can choose those as well. And you can see at the very bottom there, I've got a University of Alberta template. That's very similar to the Portage generic, but we've added more questions and more different guidance. And so that's a good example of how we decided to customize a template for our own use here. I could do those similarly for any of these other ones too. I could have a U of A specific version for those if I really wanted to. So that's just a very quick overview of all the templates in there. And of course, we're going to talk a bit about the CRDCN ones. Grant's going to go in a bit further into those, as he is the primary author on them as well. So it's good of a resource to talk about them as any. Every DMP has study level information associated with it. So you can come in and give it that project title. In this case, this is the mixed methods exemplar that I developed for release that you'll find in those suite of exemplars. You can determine right off the bat if I want this to be a private or a public or an organizational visible DMP, and you can change those later. If there's a funder involved, you could indicate that, or a grant number, give it a little bit of an abstract, if there's any IDs associated with it. So it's just study level info, and you can always come back and you can revise that if needed. Now when I come in to start answering questions, here's that bird's eye view. This is literally that slide that we saw. Now this is just the view of those sections within the actual platform itself. And so at any given time, I can go in and I can click on a plus sign next to those sections. It'll open it up, and then I can get into the question. Here I can see that I've got 22 of 22 answered. So I've got a complete DMP. And I will just note, though, that it's a pretty loose measurement of completeness, in the sense that if I go into a question, I start typing, it just captures that and says, okay, you've started to do something there. In terms of actual content completeness, that's still a human readable piece there. Whether I go into any given question, this is what it's going to look like, essentially speaking. So I'm going to come in and see the question itself. In this case, it's one of the questions around documentation and metadata in that particular template. I've added in some information around the project that I was speaking to. I'm able to go in there and click hyperlinks. You can see a little toolbar, which is, I'm sure, very familiar to you all if you've used Word or Google Docs. So I can add tables or links or bullet points and color, font, those types of things, which I tend to do quite a lot. And over here on the right-hand side, I can see the guidance that was provided for that particular question. And there's a link out to an external resource. So, that's pretty much straightforward in what it will look like for any question. Of course, the real support there is going to be in the guidance that's provided and the questions asked and such. I was just saying, once I'm done, for the time being, whether it's complete or whatnot, I can go press save on that as we go, and that'll just save things and capture it. Here at the top level for the DMP exemplar that I was working on, I can again show where I can share it out very easily. I can go in and quickly, if I wanted to remove somebody that's existing or change their level of access, in this case from co-owner, let's say I wanted to change it to read only, it's just a quick drop down. That's all I have to do, click on that. Or I can remove them entirely if that's what I want to do. If I want to invite somebody new, I just have to add their email, and then down here indicate whether I want co-owner, editor, read-only permission. If they do not yet have a DMP Assistant an account, they will receive an email, and that will be their cue to go in and create one. If they already have an account, they will also still receive that email, And then the next time they log into DMP Assistant, they'll automatically see that DMP that you've added them to in their list of the DMPs that they have when they sign in. Different options for downloading, and very easily so. Again, I mentioned you can download them into various formats, CSV, HTML, PDF, and so forth. When I'm downloading, I can choose how much I want to download. So do I want to download everything, including a project details cover sheet? Do I want all the question texts and the section headings, or do I want the unanswered questions too? So I can go and there's a few options and configurations in that sense. I have a couple of options in terms of the various font and the size of the font, and then the margins and such as well. So just a nice little feature to have. I just want to now touch on some general guidelines with DMPs, and this comes directly from the How to Create an Effective DMP, but I find that they're really valuable and helpful, especially for people that are new to DMPs, generally speaking. So when you're going and creating a DMP, it's really important to begin by providing a description of the project. So that abstract piece that we saw at the start, it's similar to when you're submitting an academic paper, or I sit on the Health Research Ethics Board at U of A as well. And you know, that's the first thing I look at when I'm reviewing an ethics application. Just give me that general sense of the project, its focus, and its nature to set the tone for me, or anyone reading your DMP. Try to avoid the use of overly the extensive use of discipline-specific jargon. So just essentially that it should hopefully be understood easily by anyone. Understanding that at times there are no other words. You know, I review research projects all the time, and if that's the case, if it's possible to give if you think there's going to be confusion, a little bit of just an explanation for that jargon, so to speak, so that somebody can hopefully be able to understand. And, you know, we live and breathe research. We use acronyms all over the place. I'm as guilty as anyone. And so I try to just make a general rule of providing clarification for acronyms used. And my rule is just the first time I use it in any given section, and then use the acronym after that. And the reason I say by section is because not everybody comes in and reads a DMP from start to finish. They might be zoning in on a particular section, like, you know, data storage, for instance. And so if you can just do it by section, that could be quite helpful. Try as best can not to leave sections or questions blank, because we don't know what that means. Is it not applicable? Did you just not get to it yet? I think it's okay to put bookmarks and even notes saying, hey, we're going to look at this later, or we're not sure yet. That's fine, but just blank just doesn't let us know anything really. And as best can, when it comes to at least major decisions, like we're going to store our data here, or this is how we're transferring data, you know, things like that, try to provide rationale for decisions made. Not just we're going to do this, but why did we make this decision? Why is it a good decision for us? And because there could be other options for things like storage, like data transfer. And that can be really helpful, again, for those that are potentially reviewing DMPs, especially as we start to see that potentially come down the pipes a bit more with requirements in place. And then again, just keeping in mind that your DMP is a living document. So, you know, updating it is absolutely reasonable, and you should do so as needed. This is just a screenshot of that creating an effective DMP guide. It's 2 and a bit pages long. The slide I just showed you comes from this section here that starts it off, general guidelines. And then, as I said, we go into points across all the other sections. And I've put a link there to each the English and the French versions of this, just so you have it right here in the slides for you. This is an overview of the DMP exemplars. So we've got, I think it was 9 or so of them here across a few different research methodologies. Again, these are available in both French and English. So if you click to these links, you should be able to get to the French ones well if you toggle the screen. And hopefully that they are helpful. The challenge with exemplars, of course, is every project's very specific and has context. So you just want to give good examples in terms of, you know, how much detail to provide, the type of level you want to speak to. Hopefully there's some good information in there around things that could be available. I authored this mixed methods one. It's the one that I was using in the examples for the DMP Assistant. So I tried to make it so that it could be one that hopefully a lot of other mixed methods research could come in and be able to kind of extract maybe some ways of managing data from it, or at least consider them if they're going to potentially be supported for them. And then just finally, leaving it off, I mentioned that there is a webinar here that you can access that will go much more detail into the DMP Assistant 2.0, including from an end user standpoint as well as an administrator standpoint. So that link is there, and that was presented by my colleague Robin Nicholson, who's formerly the DMP coordinator for the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, and now located out at University of New Brunswick. But it's a really good webinar. It's obviously much longer. I think it goes a little over an hour, but it's something that you can always come back to and return to if it's something that could be helpful. I'm going to stop there. I hope that that was useful. I know it's quick, high-level overview, but hopefully, again, it was useful. I'll make those slides available to you, and I'll pass it over to Grant now to speak a bit more in detail about the CRDCN templates.
Okay, thanks, James. So before I really get started, I do owe a bit of a debt of gratitude to James and Jeff, and we all do, for making sure that, 5 years down the road, we're not trying to standardize a plethora of different data management tools. So the fact that they started in at the beginning with a nice tool and a bunch of standardized templates is really going to help us. I should also thank Robin Nicholson, who is in the audience, for helping to get this across the finish line. So as James mentioned, I'm the author for the CRDCN Data Management Plan template, and we'll just go through it real quickly. I'll talk a little bit about some of the motivating ideas. You'll see all the specific questions and get some idea of how to go about filling this in. So in the CRDCN template, you can actually get to it just by regardless of institution. Oh, I need to move this. Hang on. Away. Sorry, the Zoom overlay is sitting over top of where I need to click. That's very annoying. Okay, there we go. So when you're going to create a plan, it doesn't matter, whatever your research organization is, you just put that in. And as James showed you, you'll see in here, you can pick one of the CRDCN templates here. It doesn't matter. You'll see I put Royal Roads in here. Royal Roads is not a partner institution. So regardless of which institution you have, you don't have to have an RDC on campus to get that template in your list. So that's just an easy first thing to show you. There's two templates. One is the internal, which is just, without a better way to describe it, projects that are exclusively using RDC data. There's no data collection or things going on. So this isn't a mixed methods project. This isn't a project where you're doing an international comparison or anything like that. You're just using RDC data, and maybe it's multiple data sets, but it's all stuff that you're doing inside the RDC. And then the next one is internal and external data, where maybe it is a mixed methods project and you've got some qualitative data and some focus groups that you want to also analyze in the context of your project, or you've got data from other countries, stuff that is not just inside the RDC. Now, this can include if you have, some data that you've downloaded from a public database, maybe by geography that you brought into the RDC to analyze in conjunction with the data that's provided by StatsCan through the RDC program. You would want to go into the external template because there is data, that external data that you've got, you can share that as part of your data management, and you want to think that through, communicating how you found that data and then going on to share it. So that should tell you which template you want to pick. And for now, we're going to want to copy some of the templated language into the plan after you export it. It didn't quite work the way I was hoping it would, but we'll hopefully get that fixed in a later version. So the core idea of the templates is that there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the RDC program where you're not doing anything, but that things are happening behind the scenes. So, most of the data management for the RDC program is being done by StatCan. You have no say over how it happens. You have no input, and therefore, it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel and have everyone, write the same 2 paragraphs of what StatCan is doing to manage the data on your behalf. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Our side, the collecting of the data, the metadata, the project folder that you have in the RDC, how that's stored, how that's shared, how that's, how long that's accessible. And then there's stuff for your side, the syntax you write, the codes, the vetted output you create. Maybe you send out some tables from the RDC through your analyst. Do you want to deposit those? Do you want to share those? What's your plan for that part of the research data? So the core ideas are, what data are you using? How can we find your project folder? And, can you share what you're able to share, knowing that, for the RDC data, you are not allowed to share anything because that's all got to be kept confidential in terms of the raw data. So just like the core portage template, there's 7 sections. We were all encouraged to follow, the portage template roughly and just kind of customize it. So it's got all those same sections that James went through. So the first section is the data. And the RDC question, I should mention the internal and external template. If you've got external data, it's going to be just both templates smushed together. So you're going to see the portage template with all the questions about how you're thinking about managing, the data you got from outside the RDC, and then combined with the RDC template, which is asking about, which RDC data do you have and how do we find that? So most of these questions are just going to focus on the internal template. But know that if you're picking the external template, you're getting that generic portage template alongside it with all that guidance and thinking through all of what you should do with the data that you can share and the other data you have. So the first question is, which RDC data sets are you going to use in your research? And there's guidance there on how to find, the record number. That's how StatCan keeps track of things for now. There's no DOIs for the data. They're all stored as record numbers. Those are accessible through the StatCan site. And they can also be found through our website, or that product page for the StatCan can be found through our website just by visiting the data set there. So you want the record number and the data set name, and that gives people a way to find that data again. As you'll see, this section is thin because in the internal world, you're not doing any data collection, right? That's all been done by StatCan. That's all documented. You don't really have to think about the data collection other than to understand it for the context of doing your work. There's a few drawbacks. The way that record numbers are, they can't handle updates. So every so often we'll get an update or a rebase or something that'll just get folded into that same record number. So here I would suggest putting into your data management plan the last date that you access the data, or asking your analyst, when was this updated that I'm working with, as you finish your project, just so you know what the date is on the data, just in case there's a future versioning that you can't really see. You can't really see just through the record number. And there is, when you go to export, your data management plan export tool will put a date on it. But that's just the date you exported the plan. So if you're updating, as James said a couple times, it's a living document. If you're updating the plan, after you've done your analysis, then that date is going to get lost. So just tuck that into the data section there, the date you last accessed the data, just for that clarity. Moving on to the next section, documentation and metadata. So here's the big thing where you, as an RDC user, want to think this through. How are you going to do your statistical programming consistently and in a way that people can understand, in a way that's kind of friendly to other people who might look at your research project? Because the way that we think of research data is that the statistical programming that you do is part of the research data. That can be deposited, probably should be deposited. Some journals will require you to deposit it. And it really is part of understanding all the inputs that went into your paper. So how can we create it consistently? Where are we going to share it? How are we going to organize the project folder? That's more for you and your co-authors, if any, just so that you can find things when you're working with each other. Because it's not always the easiest thing to collaborate inside the RDC environment. There's not open communication between, if you're working with a co-author at another university, you don't have that open line of communication while you're sitting at the computer. So planning those things out ahead of time is just a nice to have. So there's some templated language around some of the metadata that are available inside the lab. So as you know, if you've been in the RDC before, you open your project folder, you see that there's some documentation usually about what are the variable names. Sometimes there's some summary data about the variables available that can't always be made available outside the RDC. The template does ask you to contact your analyst to check and see if some of that metadata can be shared. Not always the case, depending on some of the distributions of the samples, and if there's some categories with very few respondents or some sensitive data there that can't always be shared. But where it can, you should try to find out. and just make sure that you sort of clarify that and provide that. Storage and backup, again, here's some place where you don't have a lot of control. So the protocol in the RDC is that your project folder is stored for 10 years. It can be longer, but that is sort of the minimum amount of time from the RDC program perspective. So after 10 years, there's no guarantee that your project folder will still be there, but you can provide the number of the project folder so that storage does actually, you can actually go back and find that using your analyst. And then the data is stored indefinitely, so you're not going to lose, the raw data, but any intermediate data you've made, that's not going to be stored. That takes up a lot of space. That's very redundant. So if you're creating, a subsample of your original sample, you want to make sure that you can redraw that from the raw data. And if there's a lot of interest, I can do, another training session on how to do that consistently, but most of you should probably be aware of that already. If you're using the internal data, please don't suggest that you personally will do any storage or backup. So for preservation, here's where we're asking if you're going to deposit your syntax, that statistical program you've written into a repository. Are you going to host those files publicly? Please describe what you're doing. Do you have any other, preservation that you're going to do as part of this? And as I mentioned before, the raw data are preserved. The intermediate data that you make are not. So again, no preservation of the raw data from your end, but just making sure that we know that StatCan is doing that. So sharing and reuse, you'll see journals that are allowing, or that are a little more structured in terms of data deposits are asking for data accessibility statements. We have one for the RDC. It hasn't been through all the channels to be sort of posted publicly yet, but keep your eyes peeled. That's the kind of thing that you'll want to submit to the journal when you are using confidential data. So that statement can be part of your data management plan when it's available. For now, we just have that web page that describes the process of applying for the data that can be used as a reference. So then responsibility and resources, here's where you're going to identify the members of your team that are responsible for each of the activities that you've already outlined. So if somebody's responsible to go in at the end of the week and clean up the mess that is the project folder and put it into the order that you specified earlier, that's somebody that you want to highlight here. If you've got anything else, who's going to be responsible for doing the deposits of the syntax files, who's going to be responsible for depositing the vetted output, those kinds of things, that's what you want to put in here. And then in the template, we do recognize that, a lot of what StatCan and CRDCN are doing in terms of data management planning is made possible through generous support of our funders, and we would appreciate if you would keep that language, because it also, sort of is a hat tip to just how much money it takes to run, the Research Data Center network, and how grateful we are to our funders for their help in so doing. Anything you need to add for ethics and legal compliance? That's a very open-ended question. Usually there isn't going to be, sometimes we do have a lot of sensitive data. So if your institution has specific requirements around, ethics reviews, even though it's secondary use of data, you want to put that in here. There is also the notion that, there is some control of access to the data, and that's going to be in that templated language. So just to go back over the external analysis version, everything we talked about for the last 10 slides, plus all the portage questions. So those open-ended questions about thinking about how you're collecting the external data, where you got it from, can you share it, what can you do, who's going to be responsible, how much is all this going to cost, those kinds of questions are all in the generic portage template, which comes back into the mix when you pick that internal and external template. And as I mentioned right off the top, there's two big times when this is going to happen. If you're bringing, aggregate statistics that you've got from somewhere else into the RDC to analyze in conjunction with the microdata, or where you're doing like an international, comparison or mixed methods where you're doing kind of two analyses or more in tandem inside your research project. So that's what, again, when you're going to want to pick that external analysis version. So just some suggestions from someone who's been there. You know, plan a strategy ahead of time. You know, as James was saying, you know, the right time to start thinking about your data management plan is before you start, not, you know, at the end when you realize that, you know, you need it for, you know, some funding that you want to apply to. So, you know, think about what all you're going to do, you know, understand that, you know, within the RDC, you can absolutely, you know, vet your statistical programs, your RDC syntax. That means being careful to not put, you know, in your comments, you know, some values of you know, variables that you've calculated on the fly, making sure that things are automated so that, you know, instead of having to put in, you know, this is the 80th percentile or 90th percentile of this variable, you just, you know, use the program to calculate that and then put it in automatically so that you can get that file pulled out so you can deposit it. That's one of those things you want to think through in advance before you start doing all your coding. And then if you've got supplemental data, you make sure you understand how much you have before you know, commit to a certain repository. Not that you can't change, but if you've got, you know, a couple terabytes of data, you know, your local dataverse isn't going to be too happy to hear from you when, you know, Furter is set up for that exact purpose. You know, have a look at the journals, your target journals, you know, understand and become familiar as your institution comes out with data management policies that you're complying with those. You might want to have a look at your institution specific data management plan template. You know, if you're filling out the RDC template, just pop into your institution's template and see what guidance is there, because what we don't have is an integration of the RDC template with the institution specific templates. That's too much. You know, James and team have enough headaches. So pop into your template and see if there's resources there, you know, for your university that you might make use of. You know, James at U of A has all the things because he's in charge, but some of the institutions are going to get there, and some of are already there. Don't hesitate to ask either myself or someone from the DMP Expert Group if you have other questions. You know, we don't want this to be painful, and we want it to be done well. So we have the incentive to help you on your way. And then, of course, most of you are eagerly anticipating the launch of the VRDC, which for us will have some implications on where data are stored, how they're stored, and some of those technicalities have yet to be worked out. For example, you know, if you have two files that are very similar, right now the thinking is that the VRDC will save, you know, 1.5 copies of those with, you know, 1 full copy and then some changes, and then, you know, make the 2 files visible to you. You know, above my pay grade, but I will figure out how to write that into the template and get an understanding of that as appropriate into the DMP templates. And that is it for me. So we will open the floor to any questions that others might have. We have 10 minutes left in our time, and I'm sure James and I are happy to answer whatever you're thinking about. We've got the Q&A box in the bottom. We've got the chat. And if somebody wants to raise their hand, you know, I'm sure we can open mics. It's not that big of a group. All right, we did perfect. Or it's just over everyone's head.
I'll just mention, just to follow up on Grant's suggestion, needing to reach out for additional help on, sorry, I didn't point to it specifically, but on that landing page, and once you're signed in the DMP Assistant, there's a help button there at the top, or link I should say, and that will submit your inquiry to the DMP service team. So we've got developers as well as folks that help support from a content perspective. So your question may touch on either or both of those, so feel free to use that as well. We'll get to the appropriate people that can help out.
Oh, we have one. So let's see. It looks like chat is disabled. Oh boy. Okay, well, then if you have any questions, don't use the chat. Use the Q&A box, because it seems to work. And I will have a look and see if I can enable the chat. But I don't think usually Zoom is too happy to modify settings on the fly. And as Perry's popped into the chat, which works for us, we have an evaluation form that we like for these kinds of presentations, just to get some quick feedback from you on what you saw and would like to see in the future. So if you could take a few seconds to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it.
I'm not sure if people can, I suspect they can't unmute themselves either if they have a question. Chat's down. If you want to ask it verbally, you could maybe put in the chat.
There we go. Okay, so Carolyn, I spoke to you. I don't remember which one it was. I'm sorry. Are the institution-specific templates only visible to people within that institution, or can we look at the templates prepared by other universities to get a sense of that guidance? So if you know somebody has an institution-specific template, you can type in that university, and then as James showed you for University of Alberta, once he had that in, he was able to access the University of Alberta template. So, you can just start typing in universities into the, where is this research based, and see who may or may not have one. If you're looking for guidance, I would suggest you start with University of Alberta. James, maybe you know some other universities that have some. I think Miguel has one. I don't know who else.
Yeah, there's a few out there. There's even some at the organizational one. To be honest, that's something we're looking to revisit a little bit when we launch the administrator guide that I spoke to, especially with the pending requirements. We actually have work to do at U of A as well. We've been going through our own, and links are great until they're broken, and you need to update things, I think, regularly. I think that would be my suggestion. So we want to probably give a bit of a guidance for folks out there at their institutions around some of the best practices for that. But yeah.
So Carolyn, if you have any follow-up questions or anything, I've unmuted you, or I've given you permission to unmute yourself, rather. So Martin's asking incisively, what is the incentive for a CRDCN user to complete an RDM plan unless they are applying for external funding or are required to do so by their university? I think James covered that. We don't really have anything from our end that would require you to do so. It's as I kind of mentioned, it can be a way to help think through, coordinating a multi-site research project within the RDC, which is not always the easiest thing to do. But aside from that, there's not a lot of sticks out there yet, and the carrot, it has to be worth it to you, really. James, do you want to?
Yeah, I would echo that, and thanks for the question, Martin, because I think it's a question that we often get from researchers, and really it's about, again, why would I put time into something when I've got probably not enough time to start with? Where's the value and where's the importance of it? And it's exactly that. It's supporting the research, and I've been part of those projects where it's done exactly that. I hope that people do see it as carrots. I hope that they do see it as important, but I recognize that the first time doing anything, and especially, filling out long forms or, the types of questions, it's not fun. It's not the reason you're there for the research, but when you can see how it can be supportive, hopefully that is proof enough. And it does get easier with it, but I think it's rather than, there's not a lot of sticks, as Grant said. I think it's about carrots and bigger carrots right now for me. It's about getting in there and then, helping yourself for the future and coming back to, even like the tri-agency angle. That's really how we're framing it from them, and I'm talking to them about it that way as well. So.
I think the other thing to realize is, you don't have to start from scratch every time. If you've got, a standard workflow for the RDC, if you fill it out once, you can duplicate a template that you've already started for a new project and just make, the few modifications that are relevant to that project. So once you get a little further into, things, then you're not starting from scratch when that, funding opportunity does come up and you're kind of crunched for getting everything in before the deadline. If you've got a DMP that you've used, that you've already filled out, that matches your workflow, then you don't really need to start from scratch when you've got that other deadline coming up. So that might be another reason. And now they're coming in fast and furious. So FNIGC mentioned earlier, are there plans to create an exemplar DMP that takes the OCAP principle into account?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carol. Thanks for asking it. I work closely at times with the folks at FNIGC and really value their contributions and their collaborative nature, and having them on that steering committee is where I mentioned one of their places here in supporting at least the DMP landscape. The answer is I think the short answer is yes. We've spoken with them, Aaron, Franks, and colleagues there. There's some complexity absolutely around that. So I think it's about what type of guidance would probably be most probably in starting with a template. Of course, some of the complexity is similar to what we dealt with just in a different way when we had one single portage template, which is great from a generic point of view, but sometimes it doesn't have the level of granularity or sensitivity from when you're coming in from a specific research methodology or discipline point. And similarly that, research involving Indigenous and First Nations communities and knowledges and so forth can take place in many forms and across many disciplines. And so there's complexities just even from that kind of pragmatically from that sense. But short answer is yes. And I just want to really highlight that any work that we collaborate with on the folks like FNIGC or others, and Indigenous communities, so forth, I am from the point of view that it should be ideally led by those entities, those organizations, those communities, and we work collaboratively with them to support them, and not the other way around, which I think has often been the case, not by design, maybe with good intentions, but organizations and platforms and things out there that create things up to a certain point and then bring it to them later, much further downstream, and say, now help us indigenize this. That's just not a good way of working, and not one that I would be interested in trying to do. So we're having good conversations, and it won't happen overnight. I mean, there's complexities for sure, but again, short answer is yes.
Okay, so next question is for me. Wondered if Grant could talk a little about replication possibilities in the CRDCN as opposed to pure data management. How would a replication work? Well, for right now, despite some prodding, it really has to be kind of voluntary if it's going to be easy. So, you can certainly read a paper in the RDC that uses RDC data, try to figure out what's gone on, make an application for access to the data, and try to, cut it from scratch to replicate the project. Part of what the template is trying to encourage people to do is to take their syntax, their programs that they've written, and make them available as part of what their research output is. So once that's attached to the paper, then you can download the code. And again, unfortunately, you do still have to apply for access to the RDC data in the context of a replication exercise. Bring that downloaded package in, which is also possible, and then run the code against the data that you now have access to. So it's a little messier than it maybe could be. We're trying to thread the needle between people's ownership of what they often rightly consider to be their intellectual property, which is their code, and kind of a preference for open science, where everything is as transparent as humanly possible. And certainly, you cannot write all 500 lines of code for a short paper even into the paper. So it really helps to have the journals being on board with those appendices. I think leadership will probably happen from the journal end. Certainly the top field journals in, econ and other disciplines are starting to require that, for confidential data work, you have to do as much as humanly possible to not only help someone else find and use the data, but to provide the work that the code that backs up the work that you did, so that, even somebody who doesn't have access to the data can still look at it and say, yes, this reasonably could have produced the output that we see if it was run against the data. And I think, there's been a few partnerships. I know, Marie Connolly in Montreal recently did some replication exercises for the Canadian Journal of Economics, where, they took some RDC projects that have been published in the journal and the code that was sent in with them and came into the RDC and tried to create the exact output, like a true reproduction exercise. I haven't heard back from her on how successful that was or wasn't, but I'd be interested to. And Abel Broder at the Institute for Replicability is similarly kind of pushing work on the same front. So I think we'll see a lot of movement on that in the coming years. And I think, as I said, I think the journals are going to be kind of leading the way on that. Okay, Caroline says this has been really helpful. Sorry, the chat is still locked. Martin says working with Indigenous data will have requirements. That's a sticky area. I think good work with Indigenous data has requirements. You know, compliance with you know, some of the OCAP principles, or you know, some of the similar principles for Métis or Inuit data. You know, from our end, you know, the tri-councils are maybe a little bit behind in terms of the policies that they have on what constitutes, you know, acceptable work with the Indigenous community. Hard to say, because you know, when you've got, you know, confidential microdata with Indigenous identifier, there isn't really an ability to consult or engage. So, you know, that's a bigger question than this event maybe can answer, but hopefully those little questions are some food for thought. We are at the end of our time, so if there's any last thoughts before we go. I want to thank everyone for attending, and thanks again to James for agreeing to co-present and doing such an excellent job. And we'll see you all next time. Check out our website for more information on our fall data forum. We're going to be talking about some of the cool health linkages that are coming out, some of the other survey data. We're going to be getting the inside perspective from some real veteran users, and the StatCan people responsible for creating and maintaining the data. So that should be a lot of fun. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, folks. Take care.